Joseph, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Keeler. How are you?
So you met with the governor yesterday. You, Anthony Pacenti, Anthony Brindisi.
You have good sources.
Yeah. Well, I was interviewing him during that. Did
your Facebook get hacked?
I'm always a big fan of the parody stuff, right? And that's Keeler artistry. I may have used a few different songs, though.
I'm sure you would have, yeah. I kind of like shut up and put your money where your mouth is. I like that. I think that's good.
Nobody's as talented as you, though, I got to say.
Well,
I like the voice,
that is
though, too.
highly debatable. But all right, so let's talk about. Boy, you're getting praised and hammered all at the same time here on your statement you put out yesterday. Talk about it.
Well, yes. Essentially, Bill, obviously, my focus continues to be on our state budget now and some of the legislation we're working on, constituent issues in our economy here in our area. We've got a lot of issues, and as you said, we had a good meeting, and so that's the focus. But the concern I have, and the statement was really prompted by the fact that there may be a possibility that state taxpayers may be called upon to provide funding for some of these communities who may lose funding. So from my perspective, I look at this with four basic points to start off with. Immigration reform has been talked about for several administrations, but yet we've seen no action. And I think everybody agrees that it's something that deserves our attention and consideration, and obviously a debate and a determination ultimately on what's the best approach. Look, I have great support here for our refugee center. In fact, they're going to be holding an event today. We, I think, have shown how you can do that to be welcoming, to bring people in the community for a variety of reasons. It could be they're trying to escape oppression from their homeland. Could be that they're just coming here to start anew, like many other ethnic groups did in the past. So I think that's to be applauded and welcomed, and we should keep that in mind. The sanctuary city designation, it's kind of interesting. That's what troubled me, because you get individuals now, some of these mayors who want to go out there, and quite honestly, I think in some cases they're motivated by more political aspirations and agendas than they are by their own philosophy, but that's my own opinion. But you shouldn't expect, and they have every right to do what they want to do because the people have elected them.
Yeah.
But you don't expect us to bail them out if there's a consequence. And there's a federal action that's in undertaken now, and there's a consequence potentially of a loss of funding. That, again, is what prompted my comments, because I don't want the state of New York all of a sudden to say, hey, we got to go bail out Bill de Blasio because he's lost money.
Or what about,
finally, the last thing is...
But before we get to the last thing, you could also be talking about Stephanie Miner. We had her on yesterday.
Absolutely. I mean, Stephanie Miner, if you look at a number of the positions, she comes out and complains about a lot of things that I've seen. But, I was a mayor. You've got to roll up your sleeves and get work done. You can't blame the state for not putting money into your infrastructure. You can't blame the feds for this. You got to get out there and lead. And I think, and then the concern is you lose funding, you make a political point or a philosophic point, you lose the funding, but then it's the taxpayers across New York that you expect to come and bail you out. That's unacceptable.
There is a precedent, certainly, it is in the right of the president to pull federal funding. It's been done before. I remember that we wouldn't have a seatbelt act today, seatbelt law, if it wasn't for Ronald Reagan saying, if you don't require seatbelts, I'll pull federal funding.
Actually, it's the drinking age. The drinking age, as you know, is a state. States are allowed to set the drinking age,
right?
And all states had various drinking ages. And under Reagan, we were told because there was a lot of carnage at the time, and they took a different approach, which was really un-Reagan-like at the time.
Right.
That basically said either all the states will. So there could not be a national drinking age, but they could coerce every state to go to the 21 age, and then the way they did that was by saying that we were going to withhold transportation funds, and no state could afford to lose that type of money to fix roads and bridges, because we're having problems there. So yes, this has been done in the past by different administrations. So that's just one illustration.
Yeah.
It's a real prominent illustration of that, and it forced many states to do what maybe they didn't want to do. And so my point is, if somebody didn't do it and they lost that money, then who's responsible for taking care of that? It shouldn't be that you come back to the taxpayers and say, oh, we decided not to do this because we don't agree with the approach or the method, but we're going to ask you all now to pay for this to make up the difference where you would have had that money coming from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfair to the people as a whole.
You praised. I mean, even one person said criticized you for taking both sides in your argument, but you praised immigration here. You talked about how the system is not perfect. You talked about the cities and the violating federal law. But then you went down and into the motivated whining and crocodile tears of the protesters. So talk about that.
That's not just the protesters, but that's the fourth item that I wanted to talk to you about. But before you get there, when people say you're taking both sides of the issue, that's baloney. What I'm trying to do is put a thorough statement out that expresses how I feel about various elements, as I talked to you about earlier in our broadcast here, when I said, this is what I feel about refugees. But on the other hand, there is a law, an executive order that's in place. So I think it's germane and it's a reasonable approach. Now, going to the final point, I respect demonstrations and protests. I encourage people. That's the great essence of our democracy. My concern right now is that we're starting to talk past one another. We're just continually pointing fingers at one another. We're looking to trip one another. And you're right. It started, you saw it with Republicans with Obama, Democrats now with Trump. And my point is and I think a lot of it, and I'd love to do a whole show with you on this some point, is I got to call it something, the perpetual syndrome or something, where we're either perpetually campaigning, perpetually complaining, or it's not to the point where we're trying to find answers anymore to solutions and know that at some point you're going to have to compromise. Not everybody's going to get their way.
I have to disagree with you on your comparison between Obama and Trump, and I'll tell you why. Because there were protests during the Obama administration, and those were liberals that were protesting, not conservatives. And there were protests during this Trump, but we've never seen, really in a long time, we've not seen protests like what we're seeing right now. And I'm not sure it's fair to call them crocodile tears. I thought when you were talking, let me see. I thought when you were talking about crocodile tears, you were talking about only one person, and that was Chuck Schumer.
No, not really. I mean, it's. I know somebody else said that, but maybe it was a little too hyperbole for us to be quite honest with you. But I'm trying to try to exaggerate to tell people, let's just take a breath here. Let's hit the pause button. You're not going to depose the government, but you have every right to go out there and to protest, but not with violence. Look at even some of the posts on social media, the profanity. Can't we be civil in our discourse? Can we respect one another and yet still disagree? You can still try through demonstrations and protests to try to influence, to change policy. Yeah. There are a lot of ways to do it. I watched the Tom Brokaw special the other night. I think the 50 years with Tom Brokaw. Yeah. I thought it was an interesting reflection from his perspective. He identified, did you ever see a time like this? And you and I were in grade school at the time. But the last time that something was similar to this...
I was probably still in the womb. Yeah, but go ahead. Yes. Sorry.
All right. Okay. I'll take that back.
Yes, please.
You weren't being thought of at the time.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
But it was 1968.
Yeah.
And,
I was alive.
Okay. See, there you go.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, a year where there was a lot of turmoil. The Vietnam War was going on. You had the riots in Chicago. There was a lot of the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy. So my point is, we should learn from those. And while you can be passionate and very engaged, let's not cross lines here where we see violence, and you saw that in some of the cities. I don't know what that solves.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, I mean, we have a protester here on staff. I mean, our producer, and I had no idea when we hired her that
Caitlin?
she was such an advocate.
She got a nasty right hook, Joe. I'm telling you.
And I'm going to bring her on with you in a second here. But I got to tell you, she went to the Women's March, and when the rally happened in Syracuse, the protest in Syracuse this past weekend, she was there, and
but that's a great exercise in democracy. There's nothing wrong with that.
But let me bring her in right now. You seemed a bit offended in thinking that the crocodile tears and the motivated whining was targeted at you, Caitlin. Do you feel that way?
Well, not me personally, Bill, but I just want to say that, it's not all these rallies and protests that I've been to, they are peaceful and they are civil. And it's not just showing up to cause a hubbub and get the media's attention. These people that show up to these events are really, they're making the calls. They're writing the letters to our elected officials. It's American to criticize your elected officials. It's your right to go out and protest. And it's for important issues. And you're right, we've never seen anything like this. But with Trump's executive orders, it's the least we could do to go out and show what we support.
Joe, I got to tell you something.
Yeah, and I actually agree with her on that. And my point is we also have a great system of government where you have checks and balances.
Yeah.
That's the essence of our democracy. If you remember, I think it was a Lincoln quote that said, I don't remember who quoted this, but said it's ugly, but it's the best thing that we have. And I encourage that. It's just that we don't want to see people professionally instigate or initiate violence, and we have these issues.
Do you think these protesters? And by the way, I think Joe, Trump has to be careful here. He is creating, and just keep. And I'm not sure that they have the will. I'm not sure that they do, but there's a possibility. All I know is the will that our Caitlin has here, and she's feisty and determined. I fear that Trump is creating, dare I say, the liberal Tea Party.
Well,
dun. Just think about that for a little bit.
Whoa!
You would have to call that something different, I guess, right? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, they're.
But the point.
The liberal chai tea party, I think.
Okay. All right. Okay.
But the point is that we have checks and balances in our country. You have the court system. You have the Congress. You have the executive. The government will work. I think we'll get through everything. I don't believe that this recent executive order was probably the most well thought out or rolled out, and you're seeing that in some of the comments that are being now said from the White House, actually.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we do have to get to these issues. We can't continue to ignore them and not deal with them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where our country has been. So let's you got some bright people on all sides of the issue, from different philosophic perspectives, right, left. We've got to come together and solve these things like they were able to do in the past, some of the historic figures of our country.
Well, I don't know. The message out there right now is get on or get out. Get on board or get out. That's the message. And this Steve Bannon, Joe, I got to tell you.
I don't agree with that. I think it's more...
As of last May, talking about some very, very dangerous things on his radio show. But here is Sam in New Hartford, Joe, that wants to ask you a question or comment here. Sam?
Sure.
You're on with the Senator, Joe Griffo.
Yes, good morning. As far as your comment about the seatbelt law and the 21-year-old drinking age, I don't agree with either one of them. And if you're a real conservative, you would want the federal government to keep their nose out of our business. And the seatbelt law is totally insane. If I don't want to wear my seatbelt, I still don't wear my seatbelt. That's my business.
Sam,
and if you're old enough to serve in the military, I'm 50 years old. I don't have a dog in the fight here.
Right.
But if you're 21, you shouldn't have to wait till you're 21 years of age.
Sam, by the way, you're 50. I'm 51, and I was grandfathered in. Well, all of you couldn't drink because you were not 18 or you were like 19. I was like, I think when that went into play, I think I was 18 or 19, and I was grandfathered in because of my age. So I was one of the under 21s that could drink back when that went into play. But you're on to something, Sam. I appreciate it. I'm going to talk to Joe about that. I totally agree. I'm totally against the seatbelt law, and I feel the same way. If you can go off to fight in a war at 18, why can't you drink? But Joe, you want to comment to his? Well,
yeah, I think Sam made some good points. Another example of that is the helmet law. I don't believe that you should tell somebody they have to wear a helmet on a motorcycle, but on the other hand, I think it would be unwise if you didn't wear a helmet, considering the risks that are involved. But I think where we need to step in is when you may be hurting someone else.
Right.
For instance, the texting right now. When you text and drive, you may not only hurt yourself, but you may kill some innocent person on the road.
Yeah.
That's where I think we need laws, and I think there should be a consequence.
Joe, are you
on
for
the DWI laws?
Yeah.
I think the problem there was we should have targeted the specific problem, not the whole generation. But if we were having an issue there, I would have penalized them. I would have did that differently and still, I think, achieved the same result.
Seatbelt law, same thing. I mean, why should you tell me that I have to protect myself? I mean, I can see requiring a child to be in a seatbelt, but to tell me, the only stretch I've ever heard of an argument on that seatbelt law thing during that whole drama that unfolded is that insurance companies were saying it was costing more and insurance rates were going to go up. That's the only stretch of an argument I could find on there. Joe, I do want to ask you, are you going to get on board with this assemblyman in New York City that's saying we're going to ban tackle football for anyone under the age of 14?
No, actually, I know the assemblyman. He's a good guy, but I totally disagree with that.
That is the nuttiest thing, Joe, I mean, think about it. Kids wouldn't be able to play freshman football.
And that's why, though, Bill, sometime talk about they judge the legislature by the amount of laws that we do, and they said this year they passed as many laws, they weren't working as hard. I think it's better when we pass less laws because I think we should go in there when you have to address problems or issues, you look at them. But just to go in there, if you're there too long, you start coming up with a lot of ideas that people begin to question and wonder, like, what is the rationale behind this?
Yeah. At the end of the day, I will say, have you ever seen anything like this? And, if you were in school old enough to remember 1968, and, think about and I talked about this before the election, or maybe it was after, I don't know, but we're talking about how terrible the world is, how awful things are today, and what they really aren't. When you look back, the 60s were really tough. The Civil War era was just horrific. I'm not sure that we compare to even the 60s at this point.
You're right. I agree with you, but I don't think it does any justice for people to talk about like secession and things of that nature. I think that's what worries me and troubles me sometimes. Let's work within the framework of our democracy because the Constitution is a great document. The forefathers did an extraordinary job in putting together a phenomenal democracy. There's no other place I would want to live or be a citizen of right now than this country. And so we need to work through these, and our leaders need to rise to this. And I just hope that at some point, let's be passionate, let's be involved, but let's also do this in a civil way and a respectful way where we don't try to hurt one another physically or even verbally.
Right.
That's my perspective.
Senator
I think a lot of this, Bill, it's something to talk about is this 24-hour news cycle.
Oh, yeah.
It's now social media, things that should be used for the good. You listen to TV, it's almost like my ears hurt now.
We're jumping on stories before they even unfold. Joe, I got to go. I appreciate it. And we thank, by the way, you got a ton of comments on that post. Enjoy your day, Joe Griffo. Thanks for coming on.